Left of the box. For those of you who are newish to the channel and don't know who Danielle Smith is, sorry to be the one to have to inform you she exists. She is the conservative premier of Alberta, and it feels like the conservative leaders of the provinces are really trying to become the Baron of the Barrel, as I've recently stated, where they're trying to, instead of being king of the castle, they're trying to dominate the bottom of the barrel. And so I refer to them as wanting to be the Baron of the Barrel. What Alberta, Danielle Smith, is doing right now is so devastating and will cost lives of the most vulnerable people in that province. So the SERFs tweeted out she destroyed the public healthcare system. She has slashed the fire response team leading to forest fires so bad she had to beg federal government for help. Non-stop water droughts from infrastructure mismanagement. But sure, it's the trans kids that are ruining everything. And so this is a statement that she tweeted out in a video. And she says, in less than a month, our UCP government will introduce critical legislation to ensure that children wait until adulthood before making decisions to physically alter their bodies for gender transition. We will also strengthen parental rights. Parents don't have rights, they have responsibilities within our education system regarding this issue and ensure that women and girls can compete in female-only sports divisions. Trans women are women. Trans girls are girls. Like, how is she not being charged with hate speech? It kind of blows my mind that she can do all of this. And under Canada's hate speech laws, she's not nailed for it. Like, it's just, come on. While these are sensitive topics, our government believes these measures are in the best interests of children. And we will proceed with these changes without delay. As this legislation is debated, we invite all Albertans to join the conversation. Regardless of differing opinions, we must ensure that all children identifying as transgender know they are cared for and supported. Oh, yeah, that's a bunch of bullshit from her. So if you're in Alberta, please join that conversation. Call into her office. Email her. Mail her. Get some signs ready for protests. Be prepared to protest, because this legislation that she is proposing is devastating, horrible, horrendous, and is the polar opposite of care.
My fellow Albertans, I wish to speak with you about an issue that is deeply personal and sensitive to so many. The journey of children and youth in our province who identify as transgender and who are struggling with gender dysphoria. As you may know, after announcing our government's new policy direction on these issues earlier this year, we engaged in extensive consultations with parents, educators, healthcare professionals, sporting organizations, and members of the transgender community.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. Especially that last part there, the transgender community. They did not. No. No, they didn't. Did not. And we'll get a little bit more into that after this video.
We are now prepared to introduce the legislation implementing these new policies, and will do so when the legislature is back in session. I want Albertans to know what to expect to see in that proposed legislation. But first, I would like to say a few words to those most affected by it. I know
if only people could read between the lines. The people most affected by it. She's basically saying, I hate you and hope you don't. I can't see that for sure, but that's kind of the feeling I get.
These are complex and often deeply emotional topics. As someone who personally understands the profound impact and challenges these issues can cause children and their families.
How do you personally know that? How? How do you personally know that, Danielle?
I want to make it clear that our government is here to support and uplift every child and every family of a child who identifies as transgender or who is struggling with gender dysphoria.
Again, just to go back to the SERF's point, there's so much happening in Alberta right now, like with their crumbling healthcare system, with, the environment issues, with the worker issue. Like, there's so much. And she's devoting so much of her energy and time and resources to targeting a tiny, tiny portion of the population that is already vulnerable and struggling in a very conservative right-wing province. Like, to just go out of her way so much to single out these children. And they're the ones that always want to talk about keeping the children safe. What she's doing actively harms trans children.
And more specifically to those children and youth, I want you to know that you are loved. I care deeply about each of you, and you are valued as much as anyone else in our province and in our communities.
Politicians should not be allowed to lie in their promotional campaign material. Or just promotional material. This isn't a campaign, but politicians should not be allowed to lie to the public.
I am absolutely committed to ensuring that you receive the support you and your family may need during this critical time of growth and self-discovery.
Like, she says this too, like, sorry, this video really pisses me off, and I've already seen it. Like, she's telling them, we care and we love for you, but then she gets into all the ways that this legislation will harm them, but tries to spin it that we do this because we care about you. Like, this is abusive. Like, it is so abusive, the way that she frames this. Of, we care and love for you, but we're going to deny your existence and not help and support you, but we're doing it because we love you.
I also want you to know that I and those who serve with me in our government are bringing in these new rules for only one purpose. We believe it's vitally important to preserve the time you have as a youth to gain sufficient amount of knowledge, experience, and perspective so that you can fully understand who you are, who you want to be, and what opportunities you may want to have as an adult before making permanent life-altering decisions related to your body.
Do you know what makes permanent alterations to a person's body? Puberty. Yeah, it makes permanent changes to a person's body, which is why it's so important for trans children to be able to undergo the puberty that suits their gender. Because once they've gone through puberty, once they're forced to go through a puberty that doesn't conform to the gender that they are, it's so much more difficult to transition. Whereas if they get to transition from the get-go, they're not faced with the trauma of watching their body turn into a gender that they don't identify with. The transition is just so much smoother, and the differences between cisgendered and transgendered people, for transgender children who can go through their proper puberty, it's so minuscule, the actual biological differences. Like, it's so sad that she wants to deny children the opportunity to be who they are while trying to tell them, we're doing this because we love you. We're doing this. It's in your best interest that we do this to you.
That is so very important to understand. And anyone who claims that these rules were designed to target or somehow harm you in any way are mistaken. Although questioning or disagreeing with these new policies is any person's democratic right, adults who choose to tell children and youth that these policies were designed to hurt them or marginalize them, that kind of rhetoric is irresponsible and harmful to the young people involved, and it is entirely false.
I feel like I'm in 1984 with this speak. Because she's basically saying, yeah, people have the right to argue with us, but if they do, they're lying. You know, if anyone who challenges what I say, they are lying, and they're the harmful ones. Even though I'm about to list off all these ways, all these policies and legislation I'm trying to push through that will actively harm you. But, you know, anyone who calls me out, they're the liars. But yeah, now she's going to go through the list of what they're doing. And it is harmful. It is so harmful.
I sincerely hope that we adults can debate the proposed legislation with maturity and compassion, rather than question each other's motives at the expense of the children and youth who will be listening to the debate.
Again, 1984 speak right there. You know, oh, we need to do this properly as mature adults and stuff like that. And meanwhile, they're the ones that are causing the harm. It actually kind of makes me sick in the stomach how twisted her brain is on this and how she's twisting these words so much.
I'll now go over some of the specifics to expect in the legislation. Firstly, licensed Alberta doctors will be prohibited from performing gender assignment surgeries on youth under the age of 18 in Alberta.
I don't know how many more times this needs to be pointed out, but gender reassignment surgeries on youth virtually never happens. And usually the only kind that does happen is like a top surgery. But like gender reassignment surgery on youth, not a thing. It's not a thing. You notice how they never quote statistics or actual cases of it? Because it doesn't happen. Like, generally speaking, the only type that does happen is for top surgery. But like this isn't a thing. This isn't a thing. And yet she's making legislation based on something that doesn't happen.
Puberty blockers and hormone therapies for the purpose of gender reassignment for minors under the age of 16 will also be prohibited unless a minor has already commenced their treatment.
So this is where you can get into the discrimination right very plainly. When you see this right here, so hormones and puberty blockers for the purpose of gender reassignment. So basically, trans children are not being given the same level of treatment as cis children, because if cis children need puberty blockers or hormones, they're allowed. But trans children are not allowed that type of health care. That is discrimination right there. And also,
for the purpose of gender reassignment for minors under the age of 16.
Do you know what starts before the age of 16? Puberty. So you want to wait till a child has already started to undergo puberty, see their body change, and then be like, oh, now we'll give you puberty blockers. Like, this is the party of supposed common sense. And yet so many times I've heard them say, no, only people who are like 18 years or older should be allowed to use puberty blockers. Bit late then, isn't it? You know, like this idea like, no, we want you to start going through the trauma of watching your body turn into a gender you don't identify with before we allow you to even consider puberty blockers and hormones. And at that time, you're not even doing puberty blockers. You'd be going straight into hormones, because puberty blockers, they're more just there to put the adults at ease, you know, to delay the process even more, because quite often children very, very young are already understanding what their gender is and stuff of that sort. So by the time puberty comes around, the child knows. But to put the parents and other adults at ease, they go on puberty blockers just to delay it even longer. To wait until a child is 16 to watch their body already undergo permanent changes. Again, you're not helping them. You're harming them by doing this.
Will also be prohibited unless a minor has already commenced their treatment at this time. For 16 and 17-year-olds wishing to proceed with puberty blockers or other hormone therapies for the purpose of gender reassignment, they may do so only if they have parental, psychologist, and doctor approval.
Anyone want to guess how many of them don't have access to psychological doctors and family doctors that could approve this? You know, with the healthcare crisis in Alberta, where you need to get that psychological approval and you need to get family doctors' approval for this, and then you have to deal with the biases that those professionals might have with this. Any guesses?
In our schools, the proposed legislation will now require parental notification and consent for a teacher or staff member to change a child's name or pronoun and publicly use that new name or pronoun in a classroom setting or school assembly.
Now, when the Conservative premiers do this, because this has happened in a few provinces already, they're not just talking about like officially changing it on paperwork, like the school paperwork, because I could understand why a parent needs to be aware of that. They also mean like just the casual use, the unofficial use. So in classroom and stuff of that sort. Teacher wants to respect a child's pronouns or name. And again, this is where the discrimination comes in, because if a cisgender child goes by a nickname, you don't need parental approval for that. But if a trans child wants to be used wants to use a different name, suddenly you need parental approval for that. That's just discrimination right there. To have to seek out the parents' permission for this, and it gets a little darker.
And to be clear, this does not mean reporting or outing a student for their private conversations with friends or teachers regarding their gender identity. For 16 or 17-year-olds who choose to alter their name or pronoun used in school, they may do so without parental consent, so long as parents are still notified in advance.
Sorry, how did those sentences go?
Or school assembly. And to be clear, this does not mean reporting or outing a student for their private conversations with friends or teachers.
So we're not talking about outing students for their private conversations regarding their gender identity with teachers and stuff.
Regarding their gender identity. For 16 or 17-year-olds who choose to alter their name or pronoun used in school, they may do so without parental consent, so long as parents are still notified in advance.
So how exactly are you not outing the student if they don't inform their parents? You don't need official parent permission, approval, in order for a 16 or 17-year-old to make those changes. But the parent is still required to be notified of that. And it's been pointed out so many times, if a child is holding that information from their parent, there's a reason. They don't feel safe identifying like that in front of their parents. But you still want to notify their parents in these situations while trying to claim you're not outing them. So she's saying, we're not going to out you, not at all. Like, if you're 16 or 17, you don't need parental consent in order to do this, but they still need to be notified before you're allowed to do this. Does she understand that this logic makes no sense at all?
In those extremely rare circumstances where a teacher feels that a child might be at risk should the parents be notified of a desired name or pronoun change, Alberta Education will provide a protocol to ensure the protection of that child throughout the parental notification process.
So if a teacher believes that the child might be in harm if their parents were to find out about their gender identity, she says, well, we'll deal with it at the time while we tell the parent. We're still going to tell the parent, but we'll put in a protocol. What kind of monster is she? Like, just the idea of, like, okay, so the teacher identifies that this child is vulnerable at home, but we're still going to go through with telling the parents about their child's gender identity, but we'll put in some sort of protocol? Like, this is monstrous.
So long as parents are still notified in advance. In those extremely rare circumstances where a teacher feels that a child might be at risk should the parents be notified of a desired name or pronoun change, Alberta Education will provide a protocol to ensure the protection of that child throughout the parental notification process.
We're still going to notify the parent even if we think they'll put the child at risk.
I am convinced that parents, even those who may disagree with the decision of their child, will still love and care for that child no matter what choices they make.
That is not the case for everyone. And she just says, I'm convinced of that. Why? What convinces you of that? Like, if a child is not telling their parents about this, there's a reason. And most children who suffer abuse, it's from their parents. Like, I wish it was rare. But there are reasons why statistics for unhoused youth, suicide attempts and suicides are drastically higher for queer folks. It's because they don't have that love and support from parents who disagree with them. Just absolutely horrendous.
It would be wise for all of us to remember that, rather than questioning the love of parents and their paramount role as the primary caregivers and teachers of their children.
I think you can question the love of parents for their children. It's okay. You can do that.
In addition, the newly proposed legislation will require parental notification and a parental opt-in requirement for each instance a teacher intends to address issues or subject matter involving gender identity, sexual orientation, or human sexuality.
No, no. A child goes to a public school to be taught things. I don't believe parents have a right to dictate, what is considered crucial curriculum. Because this is where a lot of the issues around sex education and consent and all this sort of stuff comes in. If a parent doesn't want their children to know about that, that's a red flag for me. Because when children understand more about sexual health, about consent, about what all of that is, they're better protected against abuse because they understand what it is and what's happening. Like, this is just setting so many children up for abuse. It is disgusting. And yeah, it is legal in this country to be gay, to be queer, to be trans, and to put it in a category where parents can just opt their children out from learning about that shouldn't be allowed. It is part of who we are. To put that in that category suggests that there's something wrong with it, that it needs to be hidden, that somehow it's not accepted when it is accepted in this country. You can't hide the fact that there's queer folks out there from Kids Forever, and it should be taught at age appropriate levels. Like, this is just, I do not agree with this at all. This just sets children up for harm.
Furthermore, the provision of resource materials or presentations to students related to these subjects in our K-12 schools must be approved by the Ministry of Education to ensure age appropriateness and relevance to school curriculum. And finally, as it pertains to women and girls in competitive sports, proposed legislation will be tabled that prohibits individuals born biologically male from competing against women and girls in competitive sporting competitions.
Women and girls. So regardless of age, if you were assigned male at birth, you cannot participate in sports if you are trans. Horrible discrimination. And again, the term biological male, that is, I understand why people were using it near when a lot of this discussion was happening, but that's not an appropriate term. Because the biological differences between a cis woman and a trans woman, after a trans woman have been on hormones, especially if she went through her proper puberty, like, we're just talking, the only difference is their sex organs. That's it. Like, the hormones, everything, their bone structure, like, if you go through the proper puberty, your bone structure is actually different. Your muscle mass is different. Like, it is just, there's such it's such a small difference. Like, when it comes down to it, once you get the hormones, you are biologically the gender of the hormones you are taking. Like, you are biologically that. So this is just a way, again, of misleading the public, separating the public, but just this idea, this is discriminatory, that you will not allow them to compete on sports. And especially for kids before puberty, there's no differences. Like, it's just, this is targeting trans women and girls. And notice how that is a focus on women and girls. This doesn't say anything about restricting trans boys and men from playing on men's sports. No, that's completely allowed. But, trans women and girls, they are being specifically targeted, even within the trans community, to not be allowed to compete on women and girls' sports.
This will apply to all competitive women's and girls' sports in all provincial sporting organizations, as well as in our schools and post-secondary competitive sporting divisions. Obviously, this prohibition will not apply to recreational or co-ed divisions. And our government will support the formation of additional co-ed and recreational divisions so that all athletes have as many opportunities as possible to compete in their sport of choice.
No, that's not what you're doing. That's not what you're doing.
In closing, I again sincerely ask that as we discuss and debate this proposed legislation, both before and after it is tabled, that we do all we can to depoliticize the discussion and focus on the well-being of the children and youth most affected by these policies. They each need to know that although adults may strenuously disagree on what policies are in a child's best interest, each of us loves and supports them in becoming the person they want to be regardless, and will
You're doing the exact opposite while telling them you love them. It's disgusting. She is a disgusting human being.
be there for them if they ever want to talk or need our support. That commitment and care by all of us for these children and youth should not be questioned by either side of a political debate. Thank you for taking the time to reflect on this important issue. And please feel free to contact any member of our government should you have questions or concerns that you wish to communicate with us.
What was that? Feel free to contact them? If you're in Alberta, please feel free to contact them with questions or concerns. Contact them away. Just a horrible, disgusting human being. Because they quite blatantly did not, consult the trans community. And I believe I've covered that before because I've covered this subject a lot because this has been going on for a while. And it's, I'm non-binary, I'm queer. Kind of hits close to home to me. And it's important. They don't consult actual experts. They get, they cherry pick somebody who sort of knows something and they run with it and just ignore and deny the mountains of evidence that shows they are wrong. And here's the consequence of that. Erin Reed, she's a journalist and is on Twitter. A trans woman, this is very close to her heart as well, and has been covering this, especially in the States with all the anti-trans laws that have been happening down there. And she says, according to a heartbreaking study just published in Nature, anti-transgender laws, including healthcare bans, have increased suicide attempts by up to 72% in states passing such legislation. The study is the first of its kind. Subscribe to her journalism. The study is only possible because half of the states in the United States have passed anti-trans legislation, while the other half have passed none or passed protective laws. It has created a cruel natural experiment. The study was only possible because the Trevor Project has been extensively collecting data. It utilizes a multi-wave survey designed which asks questions at 4 periods starting in 2018. The sample sizes are extremely large, allowing for in-depth analysis. Researchers determined that for transgender youth 13 to 17, suicide attempts rose by up to 72%, attributable to anti-trans legislation. For those 13 to 24, the rise was up to 44, attributable. Researchers controlled for states' differences, COVID, and more. In explaining why 13 to 17-year-olds were more affected, researchers concluded that healthcare bans and bathroom bans often targeted them specifically. They may also rely on their parents or guardians as access to gender-affirming care or other vital services. The increase is significant. According to the Trevor Project, 20% of trans youth in America have attempted suicide at some point in their life. Using the Williams Institute estimated 300,000 trans youth in America, anti-trans laws account for tens of thousands of attempts. This will add to the large number of evidence that trans care saves lives and that threatening it threatens the lives of trans youth. One Cornell review of 51 studies determined that it is significantly improved the mental health of transgender people. There are many studies that show the impact of gender-affirming care on suicidality. For instance, the study published in the Journal of Adolescent Health showed a reduction in recent suicide attempts of 40%. Another study noted 73% lower suicidality among trans youth who began care. These studies have led to historic policy resolutions condemning bans on gender-affirming care by the APA, the largest psych org in the world. And you can see the last study there, and please go support her on her Substack if you can. And I also have a video from Rachel Gilmore, an independent journalist here in Canada, who was also talking about this and just the devastating effects it will have on the children in Alberta should Danielle Smith get away with pushing this legislation through. And so Rachel Gilmore tweets out, "We now have devastating proof that anti-trans policies put kids' lives at risk. A new peer-reviewed study found anti-trans policies increased suicide attempts among gender-diverse teens by up to 72%. The policies are ones some Canadian conservative politicians support."
A brand new study has just provided devastating confirmation of what so many people have desperately tried to warn us about, that anti-trans policies across the United States are leading to alarming increases in trans kids' attempts to unalive themselves, which absolutely blows any claims that this is about protecting kids out of the water, and has led at least one massive LGBTQ rights organization to issue an urgent call for political leaders to drop these kinds of policies. See, a new peer-reviewed report published in Nature found that anti-trans legislation in the US, including restrictions on gender-affirming care and discriminatory school policies, caused up to a 72% increase in self-unaliving attempts among transgender and non-binary young people aged 13 to 24, with the estimated impact being, quote, consistently larger among those aged 13 to 17. The laws they cited included limiting access to gender-affirming health care, as well as access to bathrooms, sports, and school activities that align with a person's gender identity. These are the exact policies we've seen Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre say he supports, and the policies that at least 3 provinces have already put in place or have explicitly said they plan to enact. I reached out to all of their offices today sharing this new report to see if this changes anything for them. I also reached out to the Liberals and the NDP to see if they plan to ramp up their pushback against these kinds of policies. None of them have replied. I'll update if they do. But even if they refuse to act, the paper suggests a potential way that you can help save the lives of these teens. See, in the discussion part of the paper, they explain that the uptick in attempts comes after the laws are debated and enacted. It's not immediate, which makes sense. It comes after these laws impact the lives of youth, like them experiencing more social rejection, isolation, and bullying. To me, this suggests that if you push back and show these kids that they are loved and accepted as they are, you refuse to reject and socially isolate them, this could help mitigate the impact of this kind of legislation. But
there has actually been studies that show that for trans children that are accepted by their communities, by their parents, that get the gender-affirming care that they need, the suicidality rate among them actually drops lower than their cisgendered peers.
that is a drop in the bucket compared to what politicians who are playing politics, the lives of gender diverse kids, have the power to do. And if they actually care about protecting kids like they say they do and want to save their lives, I hope they'll listen to this study. What do you think of all this?
Now, Rachel Gilmore, she does the journalism, but she does so much more. Like, she really does push back on things, and we'll get a little bit more into some of the things that she has done about it, but let's just go a little bit more. So the breakdown on Twitter, they cover Albertan politics primarily. And so this is an example again of just how heartless Danielle Smith is. And they say, this is heartbreaking. Smith was challenged today by a parent of a trans child on her impending policies. Smith responded with lies, saying she doesn't want to see 10-year-olds sterilizing themselves. That simply doesn't happen.
As a little context, because I want some advice. And for a little context, my family, all born and raised in Alberta. I have 2 jobs. My wife has a successful business. My 2 kids are thriving in the province as a result of what I consider to be a good K-12 education. But I'm having trouble explaining to them why we should stay in this province, considering your proposed trans policy coming forward. I have a trans son and a gay son. You tell me why my family should stay in this province with that kind of legislation holding over our heads.
Just the amount of fear trans kids and their families and their friends must be feeling right now. Living in Alberta, I can't imagine.
Well, look, I mean, we're supportive of having children decide who they want to be, but we also don't want to see kids making premature decisions that will result in sterilizing themselves at 10 years of age.
Puberty blockers don't do that. They don't do that. Nothing in gender affirming, age appropriate care would sterilize a child at 10. Nothing. Puberty blockers do not cause sterilization. They block puberty. You go off puberty blockers, you go through puberty. Now, for children who might think that they want children in the future, there are workarounds. You know, that they find ways to ensure that those children might be able to have biological children in the future. Like, if there's one thing doctors are pretty keen on, is to make sure that everyone remains, you know, the ability to have children, to the point where they won't even allow 34-year-old women to get their tubes tied even when they have kids, because they might change their mind. Okay, no doctor is just going to half-handedly sterilize a child. That doesn't happen, especially not at the age of 10. This is just a blatant lie meant to fearmonger among people who don't understand what's happening.
So our policy is to make sure that kids get to a certain age where they understand the consequences of being on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and surgery. And so we've said that minors are going to not be permitted to do those until they're age 16.
So after they've already gone through a good chunk of puberty.
And then when they are age 16, they have to make sure that they've got the support of their families. And
only if their families are supportive, because a lot of families won't be.
Psychologists and doctors to start the transition.
Only if you have access to psychologists and doctors.
We don't want to stop anyone from becoming who they're going to be, but we
want to stop everyone.
Also don't want premature decisions being made before a child even understands what sex is.
Well, maybe if you had comprehensive sex education in your schools, age-appropriate sex education, they would understand what sex is. Like, she has actually been caught on camera openly saying that, you know, a child should basically experience sex before they decide if they want to change their gender, because they might find they like it. Like, that is the actual thing she said. Like, she's more concerned about, you know, the sex life, their future sex lives, than they are about who they are. And here's the thing. Your gender, generally speaking, doesn't have much to do with that. You know, people aren't changing their gender because they think they might like the sex better. That's not why that happens. Nobody does that. Nobody does that. It's not about the kind of sex you can have. But for bigots like her, she can't comprehend that. And she just makes it about sex. It is morbid, disgusting, and these are the people that are saying that they're the ones that want to protect and keep kids safe.
Or even understands what having babies means. I think that that's part of what we're trying to prevent.
And so this is just her tweeting out. We don't have to go over these little things here because she said all of that in the video. In Alberta, we believe children should wait until adulthood before making physical changes to their body. So she tweeted that out. And then if we scroll down here, Rachel Gilmore had attached her video to that. Peer-reviewed research shows the exact policies put kids' lives at risk. Are you okay with that? So she replied to this. And like I said, Rachel Gilmore, she goes far above and beyond just being a journalist. She does a lot of activism and pushing against people. And she gets results. She's gotten residential school denial video taken down from Spotify. She's gotten sponsors for talks with the people who were giving the talks were like racist, bigoted, horrible people. She's actually gotten sponsors to no longer sponsors those events. Like, she's very outspoken and is not afraid to, you know, publicly call out these people. And so here she is. She said, Premier Smith, I emailed this study to your office 4 days ago. You didn't respond. Now you're moving ahead with a policy that research has proven will put kids' lives at risk. Why? Support Rachel Gilmore any way you can. She is an amazing person doing amazing work. But there is a teeny tiny bit of good news around this subject. federally anyway. So Faye Johnstone says, this is a win for queer rights, trans rights. Thanks to all who mobilized with us to make this happen. And this is through an organization she helped us start called Momentum. Just a few weeks ago, we publicly urged the House of Commons to conduct a study on the rise of 2S LGBTQIA plus hate. Those who come across, thanks to those across Canada who joined our call to action, the Status of Women committees have voted to undertake the purpose study. Queer advocacy works. So following our advocacy, the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women has voted in favor of conducting a study on the rising anti-2S LGBTQIA plus hate. You know, it's a step. It's a small step, but it's a step of getting people just aware of what's happening in this country and to do a study on it. Because if you do a study on it, you can probably help better target where this hate is coming from. I'm just kind of shocked, like Danielle Smith isn't getting hit up for hate speech laws, considering what she's doing. It's just so disgusting. John Martinez, just like Republican governors passing LGBTQIA hate laws and them being targeted because of them. Like in Canada, we do have more protections. And here's the thing, is that New Brunswick, Manitoba have already pushed through laws about the pronoun changes in schools. And it was shot down in New Brunswick because it goes against our rights, like our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Putting a law like that in place goes against the children's rights. And so when it's taken to court and challenged, then it gets struck down. But what Scott Moe did, not in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, what Scott Moe did is he then used the notwithstanding clause to supersede that. So the notwithstanding clause is something that really needs to get taken out of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms because it allows a provincial government to override the Supreme Court and basically take away people's rights. They know what they're doing is wrong. They know what they're doing harms kids. But they're doing it because it riles up their base and it gets them votes. Like, their votes, they're getting votes on the blood of other people. Like, that's how much, like, it's so disturbing that they would want votes at the cost of people's lives. That getting those votes is more important to them. Like, I just keep on thinking, how lucky kids are these days. Like when I went to a Pride festival just a couple years ago and seeing these little kids with NB flags running around, like they know who they are. And like thinking back on my life, yes, I was always non-binary, but I didn't have the language for it when I was a kid. And to see all these young kids now knowing who they are and being able to express it from the get-go, just, fills my heart with joy. And to see so many people trying to take that away from them, it's devastating. And I'm not going to stop fighting back against that because they should be able to be free to live their lives.